Well, hi there. So this is the first video in the last unit of economics. Woo! Or, oh man, I wanted more economics. And that's okay. If you want more economics, there's plenty more at the collegiate level. Just as a kind of fair warning, though, it's a little bit more mathy than what we've kind of been doing here. This is a lot of algebra-based economics. Econ as a profession, as a discipline, really requires calculus, but that's not to dissuade you. I think you can do calculus. It's not too terribly difficult. You can do it. I believe in you. So if this is something that you think is pretty cool and you want to go further with, you could get a minor in econ. You could get a major in economics, a PhD even. I've had some students go do that. I don't know why they just want to punish themselves, but they do. So let's get started. This is this last unit. There's two topics that I've shoehorned into one unit here. They don't really go together, but in frank, to be honest with you, these two, they're just so short that I thought, well, we'll stick them together, and it's at the end of the semester, so nobody's going to want an extra test. So we're going to start with growth, and then we'll do what's called the open economy, which is really just saying like, hey, what about international stuff? That's kind of like part of economics. So we're going to start with economic growth. There's not a huge amount for us to talk about here, but what we do talk about is going to be pretty important. So I have this kind of interesting graphic here. Whoops, whoops, whoops. Slow down, Daniel. Where are you going? I'm going to move my face. I want to show you this graphic. There we go. Finally, whew, a decade of growth, right? And so this is a slightly outdated picture at this point, but it shows you that China has had massive economic growth rates, right? If you look here, you can see more than 5% GDP change every single year. Some years 10%, almost 15% growth every year for years and years and years. GDP surging up, right? Look at where China was in 2000 and where it is in 2012. And by the way, where it is now is like way up there close to the United States. I mean, it's arguably larger than the United States in terms of GDP. And the middle income countries is kind of where China has entered. And so China is a fantastic story of growth. And that's really our first topic. And this is from your textbook, but I think it's such a powerful quote. Many economists have argued that long-run economic growth, why it happens and how to achieve it, is actually the single most important issue in macroeconomics, because it's about making people's lives better, right? So when we talk about growth, it's really about how do we make the productive capacity of the economy larger. We've talked before about GDP per capita, and this graph kind of shows you since 1800, actually, kind of some of the big names. In fact, what I chose here are the 6 countries that are in AP comparative government, which are Nigeria, Mexico, Russia, the United Kingdom, the United States, and China. And you can see through these that there have been some really interesting shifts over the last few hundred years in terms of output, and in terms of per capita, per person output, and adjusted for inflation and adjusted for purchasing power. That's what that PPP means there. And you can see that the United States has been a world leader in terms of income per capita for a very long time. The United Kingdom has as well, and kind of we traded places right around the year of World War I. But in general, those two countries, the United States and the United Kingdom, have been historically world leaders in economic growth and creating more income per person in their countries. Russia, for a very long time, was tracking very closely, particularly the Soviet Union, right? And you can see that during kind of the 1990s, Russia dropped quite a bit, and that informs our understanding of what happens in Russia and the politics of Russia today. A lot of people were really upset at kind of the loss of prestige and the very real loss of economic power. You can see that kind of some of these other countries, there's an overlap here between Mexico and China. Mexico is this green line, but you can see that China has just zoomed from the bottom of the pack since the mid 1980s. There were some pretty significant changes that Deng Xiaoping implemented really in the 1980s that caused China to be significantly more productive. And that's really what the story of Chinese success has been. And nowadays, you have this massive country of Nigeria still kind of stuck in this middle income range of only around $5,000 of income or GDP per person. So I thought I'd give you kind of a big picture of that. This is really what economic growth comes from, right? It's defined right here as the increase in the productive capacity of the economy. So we want to distinguish it as this difference of not an expansion, right? So a really important idea here is that we distinguish between just temporary business cycle fluctuations and actual change in economic capacity, right? The capacity to produce. And we ask ourselves, where does it come from? It comes from RAP. It comes from not inflationary expectations, but all of those other shifters of aggregate supply, which are resources, actions that affect producers, and productivity. And most of all, and I bolded it here for you, it's productivity. Because at the end of the day, you can have countries that don't really have a lot of natural resources. They don't have a lot of like inherent things about their country that makes them necessarily an economic powerhouse. A good example of that is Japan. Not necessarily a whole lot of natural resources, but what they did with those resources and how they were changing their productivity is what created an extraordinarily powerful economic country. So when we talk about productivity, it's really the be-all, end-all of economic growth. And encouraging productivity is critical. And how we can do that, right? We can do that with physical capital. So that's to say more machines, right? More factories, more buildings, right? More kind of capacity in a physical sense, and growth in human capital, which is not just more people, but it's also better training. And so the AP will often ask really kind of generic questions about what that's called. And we call that human capital. And that's kind of the quality of your workforce. And so if you really want to grow, your economy, right? Let's get down to brass tacks. How can governments encourage growth, right? This is simple. It's very simple. This is it. It's very simple. One, encourage businesses to buy and build more machines, right? Two, train your people better. You've got to invest in education. So economists love to talk about how important it is to do things like early childhood education. Name all the countries that are more developed countries in the world: France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom. All of them do universal early childhood education. But what country doesn't? The United States. It's like a duh. This would be easy for us to grow our economy if we had more early childhood education. But instead, we tell parents, hey, spend $15,000, send your kid to pre-K. We do that even here in this extremely well-resourced school district that I work for. We don't do early childhood education for free. We don't have that early access. And that access to it is critical for growing human capital. As much as we like to talk about like free college for everybody, where it really can make a big difference is when they're 3, 4, and 5 years old, when we're learning language, when we're learning numbers, when we're learning socialization skills. Those are critical. So I can't say enough that we've got to invest better in that. And third, like I'm telling you, this is your simple plan for growing your economy, right? More machines, better trained people. And third is invest in research and development. You've got to pour money into getting businesses to spend more on R&D. And as a government, we've got to prioritize it. We've got to do grants through the National Science Foundation. We've got to allow scientists to research stuff that maybe we don't know what the payoff is yet. But we think if we pour money into those physics, and we pour money into chemistry and biology and engineering, we put money into those things, it will pay dividends through greater technological growth. That's the simple recipe, right? If you really want to make people's lives better, do those three things. There. Simple, right? Nice and easy. Now you know everything basically you need to know about economic growth. We do want to model it in these couple of models here. So I'm going to draw a couple of pictures. These are pictures we've seen before, though. So what would growth look like in a PPC? Well, if you've got capital goods, right, and you think about from a whole economy, you've got basically two goods that you can produce: consumer goods and capital goods. And growth would be bowing out this PPC along both axes. And now think for a moment here. If you were a country and you were producing at point A, you were producing at point B, which one is going to create more economic growth in the long run, A or B? So like A, focus on consumer goods, right? That's more consumer goods than capital goods. B is a focus on capital goods. Now, of course, your people aren't going to be nearly as happy if you devote all of your productive capacity to capital goods. But if you do put more and more toward it, and you say, let's build more machines with the limited amount of productive capacity we might have, let's build steel mills, let's build coal mines, let's invest in railroads, let's invest in infrastructure, the basic things that will allow us to build more later, that's going to cause growth to accelerate faster and faster. So connect kind of this model, and like if you were at point B, you're going to grow your economy way faster than if all you're producing is dishwashers and toasters, right? People like dishwashers and toasters, but it doesn't grow the economy as fast. As we go back for a second to China from the 1980s, one of the things that Deng Xiaoping focused on was capital. They said, let's focus on training our workers better, and let's focus on improving our technology, and let's build more things that can let us build more things, right? If we do that, if we focus on capital today, then tomorrow we'll be able to have plenty of all of what we want. So that's a kind of interesting little connection here. For growth in terms of the AD-AS model, it's just, excuse me, it's just shifting the LRAS to the right. And so we know we've got kind of output and prices there. So that shift of productive capacity from full employment 1 to full employment 2 is what growth would look like, right? We know that kind of just temporary changes in output would be, if aggregate demand goes out from AD to AD2, but that's not necessarily telling us the capacity changed, right? So this is not growth, right? Not growth. And this is growth. And so realistically, that's pretty much what you got to know about growth in a very basic sense for AP Econ. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about actually some interesting like extensions. So if all you're here for is just, I got to know what I basically need to know to pass this class and take the AP test, okay, we're good. Now, if you're interested in like, what are the specific things that governments can do to encourage that to happen, stick around for a few seconds here. First is growth policies. And this is just the idea of like, how can we encourage it? Well, we would want to encourage capital growth. So how could we do that? Well, we could cut taxes or create tax credits for businesses when they invest. And so sometimes, and this could help you on the AP as well, it could be like if you get a tax credit for building new machinery, that's growth policy in capital, right? That's how we could encourage businesses to do more of that. And a lot of times that's when we talk about supply side economics, what we're focusing on is trying to encourage growth through that mechanism. Another thing that we could do is technological growth policy. And again, that's investing in R&D. Government's role in that is to say, we need to sponsor research. We need to provide grants for that. We need to provide a stable patent system and a copyright system that supports technological growth. So all these arguments that we might have about big tech today, what we really want to do is make sure that as a government, we're not pushing big tech away. We want big tech to feel like they're part of this conversation so that they can develop the best new things to help us grow. The government obviously plays a role in all this. The government's got to be there to create the infrastructure spending, to build the roads, highways, electricity, the 5G network. We've got to have these things, Wi-Fi, in order to have a growing economy. You've got to have a good education system from kindergarten all the way through graduate school. You've got to have research grants. You've got to have political stability as well. Companies don't want to invest and grow their businesses if you've got lots of instability. And so let me pause for a second, and I'll get a little political here for a second and tell you that one of the most interesting parts of the Capitol riot, when you had all those supporters of believing that Trump had won the election, right, and they took over the U.S. Capitol, one of the things that jumped out at me was the National Association of Manufacturers. That's the trade group representing big U.S. manufacturing companies. And they said very clearly, that kind of stuff has to stop. We cannot have an unstable country because we can't grow our economy. There's no room for economic growth and making people's lives better if you have people knocking down the doors of the US Capitol. Those kinds of things are what hold us back as a country. And that's why, frankly, if you go to people in China and you say, how about that American model of economic growth? What do you think about that? They say, they're not all on the same page. They don't have a united purpose in what they're doing here. And I'm definitely not the guy who's going to say China is great. I'm not a tanky or anything like that. But I think that you've got to understand, if you want a better America, you've got to invest in the true things that make our economy better here. The other element of this is sustainability concerns. And this is critical. Like, you can't just say, let's give everything to these businesses and drop all concerns about sustainability, because one of the key components here is the availability of resources. If you have natural disaster after natural disaster caused by climate change, and we aren't investing in non-fossil fuels, if all we're doing is burning more and more coal, it's not a long-term growth strategy, right? And climate change is a major negative externality that we talked about in the previous semester. And those things are going to hold back our economic growth unless we take those into consideration. So when we talk about things like the Green New Deal, right, think about like how can that affect economic growth rates? And if we invest in new technology, in new energy production ways of producing energy, that's going to make us a world leader rather than being something that'll hold us back. So that's growth policies, right? There's a ton of cool stuff in Module 39 all about it. So I encourage you, if you're interested, take a look at it. All right, hopefully this helped you. See you next time.